It's your boy Big Baby. Support sporting icons for latest boxing news. Cheeseburger.
Right, in the description box is an article from Big Baby Jarrell Miller where he spoke to The Sun, and he starts off talking about a possibility between him and Anthony Joshua in America around about April, May time, and in his mind he says that's not going to happen. He believes it will probably happen around about September. In fact, he believes Joshua versus Dillian Whyte will happen next, but he also did say that he believes that Anthony Joshua did offer a lowball offer to Dillian Whyte. Now, even though Jarrell Miller is promoted by Eddie Hearn as well and gets paid by Eddie Hearn, he has no issues saying how he sees it. But he believes that they will work out a deal between Joshua and Whyte. But the part that I'm more interested in here is something that I said quite some time ago. So I'm glad that Jarrell Miller has picked up on it. And he's talking about Deontay Wilder. And this is what he says, and then we'll get into it. Deontay is definitely not big here in America. He's a little bigger than me over here. But anytime they bring up Deontay's name, they bring up my name. For a guy that's had a belt for over 3 years, they've only just started picking up the marketing and PR behind him. Deontay, when it's said and done, he doesn't want anything to do with me right now. And that's a known fact in the States. I'm way better looking than Deontay, and I'm much more marketable. I speak very well, and it's a whole selling factor when it comes to me and Deontay. If it happens, it happens. But sometimes you have to have your eyes on one set of goals and attack it full blast. Anyone with a title, of course, I would love. But I'm going to go for AJ because he's the closest one right now. Jarrell Miller's statement, as I said, in the description box. So, this is something that I said quite a while ago, that Big Baby Jarrell Miller is exactly the kind of character that is a selling point for Americans. He's got that charisma, he's got that outgoing attitude, and he could be controversial with it as well. He has no filter on his tongue, but he's a very intelligent guy. Wilder comes across as, while I believe Wilder is intelligent, he comes across as a bit of a hoof. Okay, he really does. He talks a lot, doesn't do a lot. He says, one face, one name, one champion. It's not about money, it's about legacy. Speak it, believe it, conceive it. Receive it, and all that kind of thing, okay? But when it comes down to it, he's got no interest in undisputed because of egos. Check out the previous video. But with Big Baby Jarrell Miller, while he does say that he believes that Joshua and that is lowballing Dillian Whyte, and he doesn't blame Dillian Whyte for turning it down so far, he says that he would be exactly the same. In other words, you're going to have to pay me a fair price to fight Joshua. But when it comes down to Wilder, he's not marketable. Now, he says that Wilder's been champion for just over 3 years. Actually, it's 4 years this month in January. So he's actually over 4 years now that he's been champion, only fought one mandatory and never unified. In fact, when he won the belt, even his own manager, Shady Finkel, who was managing Klitschko at the time, said him versus Klitschko shouldn't happen. He's still a baby, still a prospect, all that kind of thing. And made Wilder look soft. And Wilder did nothing about it. In fact, Wilder took on Eric Molina. He took on Johan Duapa, Arthur Spilker, Gerald Washington, and so on. Chris Arreola. And people look at that and go, but we don't want to see them fights. We want to see big fights. Look at our history. Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Joe Frazier, Shannon Briggs at one point, Tommy Morrison. Okay, all these guys were doing what fighters should do, which is stepping up to the plate. Wilder wasn't doing that. He was fighting people never heard of. And the only reason people know about them now is because he fought them, because now Wilder is somewhat of a talking point because he's been piggybacking off of Joshua's name, but without having the intention of fighting him. So, yeah, I think Miller is absolutely correct. Wilder's team never wanted Deontay Wilder. They just had no choice. They had nobody else. Okay, Wilder waited for Vitaly Klitschko to vacate his belt, and then he went after the title himself against Bermane Stiverne, who was an easy fight for anybody. Easy fight. And since then, he's been creeping in the shadows, sticking his head out from the shadows once in a while, shouting out Bomb Squad and calling out fighters, and then hiding behind the curtains again. Miller is a very, very marketable guy. Whether you like Miller, whether you rate him, he will fight anybody. He will talk the talk. He will walk the walk. And if he can't, listen, he'll go out on his shield trying. And that is Big Baby Jarrell Miller, which is one of the reasons why I like him. Is he as good as Dillian Whyte? I don't think so. But, listen, you never know with Miller. You never know. He's a big, big man who keeps coming forward, can soak up some shots, and keeps smiling, which puts your opponent in a position of, oh, hell, what the hell am I going to have to do now? But Miller has the talk. He's a funny guy. He's got humor. He doesn't bring up racism. He doesn't do all that kind of thing as a way of trying to get publicity and trying to get fans. He doesn't create narratives on the internet to get people to cult together and just spread hate like a cancer, like what Wilder has. Miller is a more marketable guy, far, far more marketable than Wilder ever has. Wilder's one of these guys where they had no choice, as I said. They had no choice because they had nobody else at that time. Wilder hasn't even cleaned up domestically yet. He hasn't took on Dominic Breazeale. Dominic Breazeale's been his mandatory for, 14 months now? He hasn't fought Jarrell Miller. Okay, Miller is kind of his own fault in some ways because he removed himself from the WBC rankings because he's refusing to do all year round testing through VADA. He's already discussed about all that before. He hasn't took on Charles Martin. He hasn't took on Adam Kownacki. He hasn't took on Andy Ruiz Jr. He hasn't took on the domestic guys yet. The only one he did do was Gerald Washington, who wasn't even a boxer. Wasn't he a American football player at one point? So, again, Wilder did all this to himself. Wilder's team did this to himself, but Jarrell Miller is a marketable guy. Some people like his humor. I like his humor. I think he's a funny guy. He's an approachable guy. Very, very approachable. And he comes across, in fact, he represents what Americans represent from the outside looking in, of course, where they like brashness, but they like humor. What they don't like is hate. They don't like hate. It's only a select few that jump on the bandwagon of hate. When Mike Tyson was doing his thing, not the best verbally, but he had a presence about him. He didn't feel the need to talk about himself as the baddest man on the planet. Other people did it for him. Whereas Wilder, he talks about himself as the baddest man on the planet. He says everybody else is avoiding him. Yet all these people are trying to get a fight with Wilder. Whereas Miller, he just does his thing. And I said he's very, very marketable. And him against Wilder, if he was to beat Wilder, he would be far better received in America, in my opinion, than Wilder. People would start supporting the heavyweight division, start supporting the WBC champion. Because Miller, he will go up against a Dylan White. He will go up against a Joshua for an undisputed. He will take on these guys, whereas Wilder won't. He took on Luis Ortiz because he had no choice because Steven Espinoza of Showtime forced him into it. Because they had enough of paying him pretty decent money, $1.5 million to $2 million, to take on people nobody's ever heard of. So they forced him on Luis Ortiz, or we ain't going to show your fights on Showtime no more. This was the ultimatum. And the WBC was slowly getting sick of it as well. So he took on Luis Ortiz. Got a little bit of help in that fight as well, didn't he? But beside that, he then took on Tyson Fury because he wanted that name on his resume, thinking that Tyson Fury weren't even close to being ready. And he was right. He wasn't close to being ready. But for Wilder, he was. And people recognise that Wilder is flawed to hell and back in a handbasket. He's flawed. He's technically awful. Awful. And he's been pro for 10 years. People say, yeah, but he only had like 35 amateur fights. Okay, he's still an Olympian. Joshua's only had 8 amateur fights more than him. And Wilder's been pro for 10 years and hasn't improved. He relies on that big right hand. He's already openly said, I don't care about learning. While I've got his big right hand, that's all I need. Actually, you need more. And people in America, while they love knockouts, of course they do, but they love the fact that their fighter knows how to fight. Wilder doesn't know how to fight. And knows boxing. Wilder doesn't know boxing. This is why Wilder's not popping over there. Listen, Miller's background is kickboxing. But as I said, this is the era of WWE. Well, in fact, it kind of always has been, really, where you need to talk and shouting around till this day and bring up racism for your shortcomings in your boxing career. People see through that. People go, no, you're making excuses now. But anyway, for me, I agree with Big Baby Jarrell Miller. I think if Miller was champion, he'd be a talking point in America. Whereas Wilder's not. He's only a talking point as the guy who's avoiding Anthony Joshua. Anyway, drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, and of course subscribe. Catch you all on the next video.